Coming up on Arirang News, South Korean President Moon Jae-in meets with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, the two agreeing that the way to repair their country's badly damaged ties is dialogue, possibly at a high level. South Korea's semiconductor exports have been falling for almost a year, but signs point to a recovery in the demand and price of chips in the year to come. And the U.S. signals it might not impose new tariffs on cars from countries including Korea, with a deadline looming this month. Progress apparently being made on multiple deals. It's 4:00 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. Following a brief encounter yesterday evening, President Moon met Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe again today for talks one-on-one. This time they sat down for more than 10 minutes. Agreeing on the need to resolve their issues through dialogue. Our Park Hee-jun reports from Bangkok.
An unexpected meeting in Bangkok. President Moon Jae-in and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe had a one-on-one conversation as they were waiting for the ASEAN +3 summit to begin on Monday.
President Moon and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe had talks in a friendly but serious atmosphere. The two leaders shared the opinion that South Korea-Japan relations are important and reaffirmed the principle of resolving bilateral issues through dialogue.
During the 11-minute-long talks initiated by President Moon, the two leaders expressed hope that the ongoing negotiations through the foreign ministries would help improve ties. They also shared openness to all possible options to find a solution, including a form of higher-level discussions. Their last official talks took place on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in 2018. Seoul-Tokyo relations took a sharp downturn following the Seoul Supreme Court's ruling last year that ordered Japanese firms to compensate South Korean victims of wartime forced labor. Ties further worsened after Japan imposed export curbs on Korea's tech-heavy materials, prompting the South Korean government to take countermeasures of its own, one being the termination of the General Security of Military Information Agreement. Various factors could have driven this positive change. President Moon's letter was hand-delivered to Abe by South Korean Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon during his recent visit to Tokyo. And Abe sent a message of condolence to Moon over his mother's passing last week. Chile's abrupt cancellation of the APEC summit later this month also meant there will be fewer opportunities for the two sides to meet before their intel sharing pact, known as GSOMIA, expires at the end of the month. The presidential spokesperson did not elaborate on whether Moon and Abe discussed the sensitive issues of GSOMIA or forced labor, but she said the Blue House anticipates their ties to advance in a friendly and forward-looking manner. And with their meeting having happened unexpectedly, the spokesperson could not rule out the possibility of additional discussions before the president departs for Seoul. A series of surprises regarding South Korea-Japan relations. With the two countries agreeing to resolve their differences through dialogue, there are now better prospects of some positive change in bilateral relations. And hopefully this could create a positive atmosphere for the anticipated trilateral summit with China this December. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News, Bangkok.
South Korea and the U.S. are looking at postponing or scaling down their wintertime Vigilant Ace air exercise to support efforts to revive dialogue with North Korea. Seoul's defense ministry says it's working closely with the U.S. to finalize plans for it. The new drills would replace Vigilant Ace, which has usually taken place around December. Local media outlets cite sources as saying it could be held under a different name to be finalized during the Allies' security talks later this month. The exercise was postponed last year to avoid provoking North Korea. The regime commonly condemns the maneuvers as a rehearsal for invasion. South Korea's Navy is taking part in the Pacific Reach exercise, a multinational submarine rescue drill aimed at improving salvage efforts in case of submarine accidents in foreign waters. The Navy said Monday that it's deploying the 1,200-ton sub Lee Sun-shin to this year's exercise, held for 12 days, starting today off the coast of Australia. Taking part are 6 countries: South Korea, the U.S., Japan, Australia, Malaysia, and Singapore. The exercise, initiated in 2000, was held every 2 years, but is now held every 3 years. It turns out North Korea's international tour agency in charge of the Mount Geumgang resort uploaded a post last week promoting tours to the mountain. It came shortly after North Korean leader Kim Jong-un ordered officials to talk with South Korea and remove Seoul's facilities there, saying they spoil the scenery. The agency stressed that tours should contribute to preserving the mountain's natural beauty, and the ecology at the mountain is extremely well taken care of. Analysts say the move shows the North's intent to run its own tour program and make full use of the mountain. Seoul proposed working-level talks to discuss the removal of the facilities and tours as a whole, but the North rebuffed the offer. South Korea is facing a slew of diplomatic challenges, with its once promising relationship with North Korea at a standstill and its ties with Japan at their lowest levels in years. So our Kim Bo-kyung asked an eminent historian what he thinks Seoul could do to turn things around.
Jared Diamond, renowned writer of the book Guns, Germs and Steel, has come to Korea to promote his new book, Upheaval, and has some advice that might help Seoul find solutions to the diplomatic problems it is currently facing.
In particular, he made two key recommendations to South Korea regarding its ties with Japan and North Korea. According to Diamond, although South Korea and Japan are both facing potential adversaries in the region, such as China and North Korea, unresolved historical issues were hampering their cooperation. He said a sincere apology from Japan was the key to restoring ties, but added that Korea must wait patiently until the Japanese come to a reckoning on its own with the country's wartime past. Still, the professor emphasized that the two countries need to maintain cooperation in certain areas.
Both South Korea and Japan face big problems with the depletion of fisheries around the world. Both South Korea and Japan face big problems from dangerous neighbors. So even though South Korea and Japan may disagree strongly about some things, it would be good to work with Japan on the things where you have the same goals to foster cooperation in at least some areas.
Touching upon inter-Korean ties, Professor Diamond emphasized the importance of steady back-channel dialogue in order to break the current impasse. He named Finland as a possible benchmark for South Korea to look to, with the Scandinavian country having found a way to survive despite bordering Russia to the east, formerly the Soviet Union.
The Finns learned that what they do is engage in constant discussions. They're not publicized discussions. They're off-the-record discussions with Russia at every level, from the presidents to cabinet ministers to government officials to low government officials.
The eminent author shares more of his insight in his new book, showing ways the world can deal with global challenges, citing the examples of 7 countries that went through a national political crisis. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
South Korea's prime minister says measures to reduce air pollution need to go beyond national borders because borders can't be drawn in terms of the atmosphere. Speaking Monday at the International Forum on Air Pollution and Climate Change, Lee Na-kyun said it's time for the global community to act together on air pollution and issues of environmental change. He said the results of joint research by South Korea, China, and Japan will be released this month, and he hopes that those can lead to ways to improve air quality. South Korean figure skater Lim Eun-soo has won the gold medal in the women's single event at the 2019 Asian Open Figure Skating Trophy. At the competition in Dongguan, China, Im scored 66.84 in the short program on Saturday and 130.79 in free skating on Sunday to beat out 15 other skaters. Fellow South Korean Kim Han-eul came second. Im will compete in the ISU Grand Prix NHK Trophy from November 24th in Sapporo, Japan. South Korea's exports fell for the 11th consecutive month this October amid slowing global trade and the ongoing U.S.-China trade war. But the production and export volume of semiconductors has been going up, and demand for chips is expected to rise. Kim Hye-sung reports.
Data shows semiconductor exports, which account for about a fifth of South Korea's total exports, are likely to go up in 2020. According to the Trade Ministry on Monday, semiconductor export volume went up 16% on year to more than 2,500 tons last month. Between January and October, chip export volume was up 5% on year, and it has increased by double digits on year since July. Semiconductor production also increased. Data shows chip production in the third quarter went up 8% on year. But the value of chip exports plunged 26% on year to around $79 billion in the month through October due to a sharp fall in memory chip prices like DRAM and NAND flash on oversupply. But with memory chip prices having almost bottomed out, experts say value of chip exports is expected to recover next year.
The memory chip industry is cyclical with a 2 to 4 year cycle of ups and downs depending on supply and demand. And this cycle is shortening on technological advances. We saw a chip boom in 2016 and a downturn in the latter half of 2018. Companies like Micron Technology and Samsung Electronics have lowered their inventories, and demand for chips is set to pick up.
Global demand for chips is expected to increase on demand from data centers and the wider adoption of 5G technology in driverless cars, AI, and IoT. Global Research Institutes estimate demand for memory chips to go up by between 5.5% and 17% on year in 2020. 김혜성, Arirang News.
South Korea's National Assembly Speaker Moon Hee-sang, on a visit to Japan, stressed the need for cooperation among the G20 countries to promote free and fair trade. In his keynote speech Monday at the G20 Speakers Summit in Japan, Moon pointed out that the global order in trade and investment is hampered by protectionism, adding that to restore this, joint action by the G20 to uphold its principles is needed now more than ever. Moon did not directly mention South Korea's trade dispute with Japan, but his remarks are seen as a reference to Tokyo's trade restrictions. The speaker will wrap up his stay in Japan with a lecture on Tuesday at a local university on ways to repair the two countries' relations. U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross says the Trump administration might not need to impose tariffs on cars later this month. Apparently, the administration's come to an understanding with South Korea and other countries. Lee Seung-jae reports.
Speaking to Bloomberg Television on Sunday at the ASEAN Plus 3 summit in Bangkok, U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross said Washington may delay plans to put auto tariffs on a number of countries after holding what he called good conversations with them. South Korea was earlier exempted from any future tariffs after renegotiating the South Korea-U.S. FTA last year. The U.S. also struck a deal with Japan last month, but the EU has yet to reach an agreement with the deadline looming. However, Ross remained optimistic a deal will be reached. This comes as the Trump administration agreed to delay new tariffs on imported cars and parts for 6 months in May as it continued negotiations. President Trump must decide whether to impose tariffs of 5 to 15% by November 17th, but Ross says it may be unnecessary in light of the negotiations. However, if Trump proceeds with the measures, it will cause a massive escalation in the U.S.-EU trade conflict, with German automakers like Mercedes-Benz and BMW taking the biggest hit. Experts say such tariffs would significantly increase car prices in the United States and potentially lead to hundreds of thousands of jobs falling by the wayside in the U.S. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Time now for an in-depth look at the market news as we start the week. And for that, I'm joined on the line by Dr. Yang Jun-seok, professor of economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Dr. Yang, thank you for coming on today.
You're welcome.
Well, last week, with the U.S.-China trade war going on and a slowdown in the semiconductor business and so on, we saw Korea's exports decline for an 11th month in a row. What's your outlook in the near term?
Okay, well, Korean exports were $46.8 billion, which was 14.7% below October last year, and imports were $41.4 billion, which was 14.6% below last year. So Korea did not have a very good October. On the other hand, if you look at it month to month, then exports increased 4.6% from September. Imports increased 6.8% from September. So that's good news among the bad news. And last October's exports were actually quite above what we were expecting last year. So in a sense, partially we did not do well this year, but also partially because we did so much better last year, the numbers look extraordinarily bad compared to last year. But still, the export performance has been disappointing throughout the year, and imports and exports both fell together, so that means that the economic slowdown is continuing. As you previously mentioned in the previous story, government believes that we'll hit the bottom in October and things will start to improve, and the exports will start increasing in January of next year. I have some caveats on that personally, because I think it entirely depends on whether President Trump and China gets some kind of agreement worked out, even if it turns out to be a small deal. But if the trade war continues and if it expands to areas like automobiles, then I think even in January we'll see a very bad export performance in Korea.
Right. Well, speaking of trade and other issues, President Moon is in Thailand, as are many other world leaders and top officials. South Korea gets ready to host the ASEAN summit later this month. What will President Moon get out of this trip to Thailand, and how can this boost cooperation with the ASEAN member countries?
Okay, well, ASEAN and the plus three countries, that's Korea, China, and Japan, it's about a third of the global economy, and Korea has been interested in ASEAN countries because, well, we believe that Korean exports are too focused on United States and China, so we've been seeking to diversify, and the ASEAN region is actually a perfect region for Korea to diversify its exports. Vietnam, one of the countries in ASEAN, has emerged as the third largest export destination for Korean goods. It took 9% of total Korean exports this year from January to September, and it's also the fourth largest import partner. Korea, about 4% of Korea's total imports this year came from Vietnam, and Korea has also just signed a CEPA agreement with Indonesia. Korea does have an FTA with ASEAN as a whole, but it's a very light-level FTA, so it doesn't seek deep market liberalization, and as a result, a lot of ASEAN countries want to sign individual FTAs with Korea so that they can achieve deeper liberalization. As I mentioned, Indonesia just signed an FTA, and then Philippines and Malaysia, they're negotiating with Korea to form a deeper level FTAs themselves. So ASEAN is a potential market for Korea to get into. Indonesia, for example, is the fourth highest population country in the world, and still is in a very much a developing stage with very young population. So if we make an inway to Indonesia, that'll prove to be a very good market for Korea in the long run.
Got it. So a lot of potential there indeed. And meanwhile, this week, we're expecting some key economic indicators to come out. How do you see Korean and global stocks moving this week? Okay, well, we have a lot of interesting variables coming out this week. We have business confidence index coming from the United States. Trade account figures coming from U.S. and China. We have European Central Bank economic report, U.S. consumer credit report, and EU finance ministers meeting, as well as in Korea, we're going to have corporate statement analysis, as well as government finance report. But in the end, I think all of these statistics are going to show that we're not in a good place. The global economy is heading for a slowdown, and Korean economy especially is going to be in a slowdown. So I think for the most part, the news is not going to be good, and as a result, stock market is not going to be very happy. But I think there's one possibility that could pick up, which is the U.S.-China trade negotiations. We've been hearing a lot of things about how
a small deal is being worked out. If that is successfully worked out, I think that will act as a plus for the stock market. And then another wild card variable that we need to watch out for is there's going to be a lot of speeches by the regional governors of the United States Fed, and they've been giving strong signals that they will not change the interest rate, they will not lower it or increase it in the near future. We'll have to see whether they stick to that position or whether there's sort of a crack where some governors want to lower the rates and some governors want to raise the rates, or whether they formed a sort of a consolidated opinion so that the interest rate will be held steady for a long time.
All right, so maybe some choppy waters ahead. Dr. Young, thanks so much for your insights today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, here in Seoul, all the trains on subway line 9 have been lengthened to 6 cars from today to ease congestion on what's been for a decade the subway's most crowded line. Starting from the end of November, the Seoul Metropolitan Government says it also plans to increase the 37 trains currently running on a typical weekday to 40. Subway line 9 is especially crowded during rush hour because the trains are only 4 cars long and because it's on a key route that stops at major transit stations at a much faster speed than other lines. The sharing economy is starting to take off here in South Korea for things like homes and cars, but there's still a lot of hurdles, especially in its mobility platforms, as with last week's indictment of the heads of a local ride-hailing service for operating without a license. Our Kim Jae-hee takes a look at the future of South Korea's sharing economy.
This secure, mutually beneficial platform connects its host and guest, where rooms are rented out at a reasonable price based on blockchain technology. But things are not easy for home-sharing services in Korea. The CEO of the company bemoaned the many obstacles in the way of further expansion, including outdated regulation.
A tourism law passed in 2011 only allows foreigners to access homestay services, which are not available for local tourists. Instead of creating a way for local startups to tap into the domestic market, the government blocked it altogether.
Home sharing is not the only sector that has run into legal roadblocks. South Korea's ride-hailing platform Tada is in hot water after company executives were indicted by prosecutors on charges of running the service without a legal license. Even global sharing economy platforms are failing in Korea, with Uber Eats pulling out of the country last month amid tough competition. Local sharing economy platforms are concerned whether Korea can keep up with the global trend due to regulatory setbacks and resistance from traditional businesses.
Sharing economy is fundamentally based on IT technology. So naturally, South Korea should be at the forefront when it comes to adopting sharing economy services. But it's not. It's lagging behind because of regulations that are dragging it down.
Experts say changes are needed for Korea to keep pace with the global competition.
The fourth industrial revolution and the shift towards the sharing economy is the world's biggest stream of innovation. Korea will have to quickly catch up, and the government should take action to facilitate peace and compromise between traditional industries and new startups.
Expert also added that it isn't too late for Korea to fulfill its potential and encouraged the government's push for a negative regulatory system, which deems all activities legal unless they are expressly banned by the law. Kim Jae-hee, Arirang News.
Tickets for a new monorail near Seoul are selling out every day. This is the Wolmi Sea Train, and it's now been named one of the 100 must-see destinations in the country. Ji-young has more.
South Korea's longest urban tourist monorail, the Wolmi Sea Train, stops at a number of popular attractions, including theme parks and streets full of cafes and seafood restaurants. According to an official from the Incheon Transit Corporation, roughly 1,400 people a day board the train on average. As it carries a maximum of 46 passengers per ride and only 4 or 5 trains operate every hour, the tickets tend to sell out quickly.
We open at 10 a.m. and close at 6 p.m., but visitors come even before the service starts at around 9 and wait for 2 to 4 hours to ride the monorail.
The 2-car monorail loops around 4 stations, including Wolmi Park Entrance and Culture Street, at a speed of 10 kilometers per hour. This monorail service runs roughly 6 kilometers from Incheon station to several places on Wolmi-do Island. Passengers can get a great view of the coastal waters of Incheon as the raised track is as high as 18 meters in places. During their 35-minute journey around the circular route, passengers can also enjoy the famous view of Wolmi-do Island, including the silo wall painting, which holds the Guinness World Record for the largest outdoor mural in the world.
I saw silo wall paintings, amusement parks, cruise ships, and the beautiful glow of sunset over the sea. It was a fun ride.
Passengers can also get off and reboard the train to move from one spot to another on Wolmi-do Island.
I came all the way from Gwangmyeong City in Gyeonggi-do to visit Incheon. It was a fun ride and I took the train to Chinatown to have noodles with black soybean sauce and enjoy the tour at Songwol-dong Fairy Tale Village.
The construction of the monorail was mostly completed in 2009, but service only began in October of this year after a number of safety issues were rectified. Ji-young, Arirang News, Incheon.
And that's all for this hour. Thank you for watching.
'19 Overseas TV Audience Survey.